The date is May 15, 1911. In a courtroom in Washington, D.C., Chief Justice Edward White reads from a decision that will fracture the largest corporation America has ever known. Standard Oil Company of New Jersey must be dissolved. 41 years of construction, consolidation, and control erased by judicial decree. The monopoly that 9 men in black robes are destroying at this moment controls 91% of oil refining in the United States. It owns 20,000 wells, 4,000 miles of pipeline, employs over 100,000 workers. It has made one man, John Davison Rockefeller, the wealthiest human being on earth. The courtroom is silent as White's voice fills the chamber. Light streams through tall windows, illuminating dust motes that hang suspended in the air. Lawyers on both sides sit rigid in their chairs, some leaning forward to catch every syllable. In the gallery, journalists scribble furiously in their notebooks, already composing the headlines that will dominate tomorrow's front pages. One reporter will later describe the atmosphere as a cathedral witnessing the fall of a god. But here is what makes this moment strange. Within 1 year, the stock value of the shattered pieces will triple. The shareholders, primarily the Rockefeller family, will become richer than they were when the company stood whole. The 34 successor companies created by this forced dissolution will grow into ExxonMobil, Chevron, BP, ConocoPhillips. The government is not destroying an empire, it is planting the seeds of 34 new ones. And stranger still, during the 41 years that Standard Oil grew from a Cleveland refinery into a national colossus, the price of kerosene, the product that built this empire, dropped from 26 cents per gallon to 8 cents per gallon. The monopoly everyone feared would exploit consumers through price gouging actually charged less than the chaotic competitive market it replaced. The trust that was strangling American commerce had, by measurable economic fact, made its primary product cheaper and more reliable than it had ever been. So what exactly is being destroyed today? A predator that crushed competition through illegal means, or a machine that brought order to industrial chaos? The answer depends on whether you believe efficiency justifies coercion, whether lower prices excuse broken laws, whether the end of monopoly can justify monopolistic means. Today, the Supreme Court has answered those questions, but the consequences of that answer will unfold in ways no one in this courtroom can anticipate. Before we travel back to understand how a bookkeeper's son from rural New York built the thing that 8 Supreme Court justices just dismantled, I want to ask something of you. If this story interests you, if you want to see more long-form documentaries that challenge conventional narratives, take a moment right now to like this video and subscribe to the channel. I put months of research into creating these, and your support makes that possible. And I'm genuinely curious, where in the world are you watching this from? Drop a comment and let me know. Now, let's go back to the beginning, to the moment when American oil meant chaos, waste, and boom-bust devastation. To the world before Standard Oil existed. In 1859, a former railroad conductor named Edwin Drake strikes oil near Titusville, Pennsylvania. The well produces 25 barrels per day. Within 2 years, the region is producing 3 million barrels annually. The discovery triggers a rush that mirrors the California gold rush a decade earlier, but with one critical difference. Gold sits in discrete deposits, oil pools underground in formations that, once tapped, can drain the entire field. The first prospectors to reach a site can extract everything. Latecomers find emptied earth. The scene in Titusville in the early 1860s resembles a fever dream more than an industrial enterprise. Mud streets thick enough to swallow wagon wheels whole. The stench of crude oil so pervasive that newcomers retch for days until their noses acclimate. Derricks constructed from green lumber, erected in days by men who have never built anything larger than a barn. At night, the oil regions glow with the light of natural gas flares, waste gas burned off because no one has figured out how to capture or sell it. The noise is constant, hammering, sawing, steam engines chugging, men shouting over the din. Fortunes are made and lost in weeks. A farmer who leases his land to drillers wakes up wealthy. A month later, when the well runs dry and the drillers move on, he is left with poisoned soil and broken dreams. Hotels in Titusville charge rates that would shame a New York luxury establishment. A bed in a shared room costs $5 per night, more than a week's wages for a laborer. Meals are crude and expensive: beans, salt pork, bread that arrives rock hard from Pittsburgh. No one complains. Everyone is too busy chasing the next strike. Women are scarce in the oil regions during these early years. Those who come are either wives of prospectors or proprietors of establishments that serve the boom economy's other needs. Saloons, gambling houses, and brothels multiply faster than churches. Violence is common, but rarely prosecuted. The Pennsylvania oil regions exist in a legal gray zone where local law enforcement is overwhelmed and state authorities are hundreds of miles away. Disputes are settled with fists, knives, or occasionally pistols. Bodies are found in creeks, their deaths attributed to accidents or natural causes with perfunctory investigations. This creates an extraction race. Drillers punch wells as fast as possible, often so close together that derricks nearly touch. Production explodes, supply vastly exceeds demand. In 1861, oil sells for $10 per barrel. By 1862, prices collapse to 10 cents per barrel. Producers go bankrupt, wells are abandoned, then supply contracts, prices spike again, and the cycle repeats: boom, bust, boom, bust. The Pennsylvania oil regions become what contemporary observers call the Valley of Greed, a landscape of mud, crude-soaked earth, jerry-rigged derricks, and men gambling everything on volatile commodity prices. But the real chaos exists not in production, but in refining. Crude oil is useless until processed into kerosene, the product that will illuminate American homes. Refining requires capital, technical knowledge, and proximity to transportation networks. Cities with railroad access, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, New York, become refining centers. Small refineries proliferate. In Cleveland alone, 26 refineries operate by 1866. Most are undercapitalized, inefficient, and vulnerable to price swings. When crude prices rise, refiners get squeezed. When crude prices fall, refined product prices collapse. Profit margins are thin. Bankruptcy is constant. The early refineries are dangerous places. The distillation process involves heating crude oil to separate different hydrocarbon fractions. Temperature control is imprecise. Explosions are common. Workers suffer burns, respiratory damage from fumes, and chronic illnesses from prolonged exposure to chemicals. Insurance companies charge prohibitive rates or refuse coverage entirely. Fire departments in refining cities maintain constant vigilance, knowing that a single refinery fire can spread to neighboring structures and consume entire blocks. Product quality varies wildly. Some refiners produce kerosene that burns clean and steady. Others produce kerosene contaminated with volatile fractions that cause lamps to explode. Newspapers regularly report deaths from kerosene lamp explosions. A woman killed when her lamp burst while she was reading. A family of 5 incinerated when a lamp fell and ignited their wooden home. Consumers have no way to assess quality before purchase. They buy kerosene, light their lamps, and hope. Trust in brands is non-existent because brands barely exist. Each refinery sells under its own name, and names proliferate too rapidly for consumers to track. Into this world walks a 24-year-old commission merchant named John Davison Rockefeller. He is not an oil man. He has never drilled a well, never worked a refinery. His expertise is accounting. He grew up in rural New York, the son of a traveling salesman who sold patent medicines and, it will later emerge, maintained a secret second family under an assumed name. William Avery Rockefeller was a con man. He taught his children to be sharp in business dealings because he claimed it would prepare them for a world of cheaters. He was frequently absent. The family moved often, always just ahead of debts or suspicions. William Rockefeller's methods left marks on young John that would never fully fade. He would return from months-long absences with pockets full of cash, entertaining the children with stories of his travels while avoiding specifics about his business. He lent money at usurious rates to farmers and small businessmen, then pursued repayment with ruthless efficiency. He once sold John a bag of candy for a premium price, then refused to refund the money when young John protested. "I told you it was a good deal," William said. "I never said it was a fair one. Let that be a lesson to you." John's mother, Eliza, provided the stability his father denied. Devoutly Baptist, rigidly disciplined, she managed the household through William's absences. She taught John that wealth was acceptable only if earned through honest work and used for righteous purposes. She instilled in him a horror of chaos, of instability, of the kind of financial precariousness that defined their family life. John absorbed both parents' lessons. From his father, be sharper than everyone else. From his mother, justify that sharpness through moral purpose. The tension between these two influences created the man who would build Standard Oil. John D. Rockefeller believed that business was warfare, that competitors were enemies to be defeated, that sentiment had no place in commercial decisions. But he also believed that his success was divinely ordained, that God had given him organizational abilities to serve society, that his wealth was a sacred trust to be used for righteous ends. These beliefs were not contradictory in his mind, they were complementary. The ruthlessness served the righteousness, the warfare produced order, the destruction of competitors created efficiency that benefited consumers. At 16, he takes a job as an assistant bookkeeper in Cleveland. He is meticulous, obsessive about detail, temperamentally suited to the precision of accounting. By 1863, he has saved enough to enter a partnership in a commission merchant business. The business is stable but unexceptional. Then a colleague, Samuel Andrews, approaches him about investing in an oil refinery. Andrews has technical knowledge, Rockefeller has capital. They form a partnership. Rockefeller is 24 years old. He is entering an industry he does not fully understand, driven by a single insight. Refining is the choke point. Producers chase oil underground. Consumers need refined kerosene. Whoever controls the refining controls the profit. This insight will build an empire. But in 1863, Rockefeller is simply one more small refiner in Cleveland, competing with 25 others, all struggling with the same problem. The industry has no stability, prices fluctuate wildly, supply is unpredictable. Railroads charge different rates to different shippers, often based on negotiating power rather than distance or volume. There is no standard quality for refined products. A barrel of kerosene from one refinery may burn cleanly. From another, it may explode. Consumers have no way to distinguish good product from dangerous product until they light it. Rockefeller's first move is to impose internal order. He standardizes every aspect of his refinery's operation. Barrels are made to identical specifications. Kerosene is tested rigorously. Waste products previously discarded are processed into gasoline, lubricants, paraffin wax. Other refiners view waste as unavoidable. Rockefeller views it as lost profit. His refinery becomes the most efficient in Cleveland. Costs per gallon drop below competitors. When crude prices spike, his refinery survives while others fail. He begins buying those failed refineries at bankruptcy prices. He walks through his refinery daily, notebook in hand, recording observations. A worker is using too much solder on barrel lids, 3 drops when 2 would suffice. Rockefeller calculates the annual cost of that single extra drop across all barrels produced. It amounts to thousands of dollars. He issues a directive, 2 drops only. When workers complain that 2 drops sometimes fails to seal properly, he experiments until he finds a technique that works reliably with exactly 2 drops. The extra drop is eliminated, thousands of dollars saved. This obsession with detail extends to every aspect of operations. He counts the rivets in barrels and determines that 39 rivets hold as well as 40. Standard begins using 39 rivets. He tracks the price of every input, lumber, iron, chemicals, and buys in bulk during price dips, storing materials for months to avoid peak prices. He negotiates with suppliers not just on price but on delivery schedules, quality specifications, payment terms. Every fraction of a cent matters because fractions accumulate into dollars when multiplied across millions of gallons. His employees find him cold, impossibly demanding, indifferent to personal circumstances. A worker with a sick child receives no sympathy if productivity declines. A foreman who has served loyally for years is dismissed without ceremony when a younger man demonstrates superior efficiency. Rockefeller offers no explanations, no apologies. The refinery exists to produce kerosene at the lowest possible cost. Everything else is irrelevant. Yet, he pays above-market wages to skilled workers whose efficiency justifies the premium. He invests in safety equipment that other refiners consider unnecessary expense, recognizing that accidents disrupt production and trained workers are valuable assets. He is not cruel for cruelty's sake. He is indifferent to everything that does not serve efficiency. The distinction matters. Cruelty implies emotion. Rockefeller's management style is emotionless, purely rational, focused exclusively on measurable outcomes. By 1865, he owns the largest refinery in Cleveland. By 1868, he is the largest refiner in the world. But large is not the same as dominant. He still controls only a fraction of national refining capacity. The industry remains chaotic. Prices still swing wildly. And now a new threat emerges. The railroads are offering secret deals to the largest shippers. Transportation costs determine refiner profitability. Cleveland is not an oil-producing region. Crude must be shipped in from Pennsylvania. Refined kerosene must be shipped out to markets. Railroads, primarily the Lake Shore Railroad, controlled by Cornelius Vanderbilt, charge published rates but negotiate private discounts with large shippers. Volume matters. A refiner shipping 10 carloads per week pays less per barrel than a refiner shipping 1. This creates a feedback loop. Large refiners get better rates, which lowers their costs, which allows them to undercut smaller competitors, which increases their volume, which improves their rates further. Rockefeller sees the pattern. He approaches the Lake Shore Railroad with a proposal. He will guarantee large, consistent shipments in exchange for the lowest possible rates. The railroad agrees. His cost advantage over competitors widens. He uses that advantage to offer a choice to smaller Cleveland refiners: sell to him at a fair price, or compete against him with higher transportation costs until bankruptcy. Most sell. By 1870, he is ready to formalize the consolidation. On January 10th, Standard Oil Company incorporates in Ohio with $1 million in capital. Rockefeller controls the majority stake. His partners include Samuel Andrews, Henry Flagler, Stephen V. Harkness, and his brother William Rockefeller. The incorporation occurs in a small office in Cleveland on a cold January morning. 5 men sign documents that create the legal entity that will dominate American oil for 4 decades. There is no ceremony, no celebration. Rockefeller views the incorporation as a formality, a legal structure to facilitate operations he is already conducting. The meeting lasts less than an hour. Afterward, Rockefeller returns to the refinery. There is work to be done. The legal form has changed. The work has not. Standard Oil is now the largest refiner in Cleveland, but Cleveland is only one refining center. Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, New York all have their own refineries. If Rockefeller wants true control, if he wants to eliminate the chaos that threatens every refiner, he needs to consolidate nationally, and to do that he needs more than favorable railroad rates. He needs a weapon that will force competitors to sell. In 1871, that weapon appears. It calls itself the South Improvement Company. The South Improvement Company is not a refining business. It is a coalition of large refiners and 3 major railroads: the Pennsylvania, the Erie, and the New York Central. The plan is simple and devastating. The railroads will raise published rates on oil shipments, but members of the South Improvement Company will receive rebates that bring their actual costs below previous levels. Non-members will pay the inflated published rates. And here is the true brilliance, the element that transforms this from mere favoritism into a competitive weapon. Members will receive a portion of the freight payments made by non-members. Every barrel a competitor ships will subsidize Standard Oil's transportation costs. The scheme is conceived in a series of secret meetings in New York during late 1871. Railroad executives and refinery owners gather in private dining rooms of expensive hotels, speaking in careful euphemisms about rationalizing the market and eliminating destructive competition. The railroads are desperate. They have been cutting rates to compete with each other for oil shipments, driving their own profits down. The South Improvement Company offers them a way to raise rates while keeping their largest customers happy through rebates. For the refiners, it offers a weapon to eliminate competition without direct price wars. Rockefeller later claims he did not originate the scheme, that he was approached by railroad executives who proposed it. This is technically true but misleading. He did not create the idea, but he immediately recognized its potential and became its most effective advocate. He helped structure the rebate system. He calculated the rate differentials needed to make competition impossible for non-members. He identified which refiners to include and which to exclude. The South Improvement Company may not have been his idea originally, but he made it his weapon. The scheme is not illegal. There are no laws against railroad rebates in 1871, but it is predatory, transparently designed to destroy competition through artificial cost advantages. When news of the South Improvement Company leaks in February 1872, the reaction is explosive. Independent oil producers in Pennsylvania, realizing they will be crushed between low crude prices and high transportation costs, organize mass protests. Trains carrying Standard Oil products are stopped. Rockefeller is burned in effigy in the Pennsylvania oil regions. The Pennsylvania state legislature investigates. Within weeks, public pressure forces the railroads to abandon the scheme. The South Improvement Company never completes a single transaction. The protests in Pennsylvania are violent and chaotic. 3,000 men gather in Titusville on February 26, 1872, to denounce the South Improvement Company. Speakers condemn Rockefeller as a tyrant, a robber, a man who would strangle American enterprise for personal profit. The crowd marches through the streets, stopping oil shipments, confronting railroad workers. One train carrying Standard Oil barrels is surrounded by protesters who threaten to burn the cars unless the shipment is turned back. The railroad complies. The train retreats. Newspapers in the oil regions publish daily denunciations. Editorial writers compare the South Improvement Company to European monopolies that oppress commoners. Political cartoons depict Rockefeller as an octopus, tentacles wrapped around helpless refiners and producers. Public meetings in every major oil town pass resolutions demanding state and federal action. Ministers preach sermons against monopolistic greed. Women's groups organize boycotts of Standard Oil products, though these prove ineffective because most consumers cannot identify which kerosene comes from which refiner. But Rockefeller has already used it. In the 6 weeks between the plan's formation and its public exposure, he approaches every refiner in Cleveland with a simple proposition. The South Improvement Company is coming. When it does, you will not be able to compete. Sell to me now at a reasonable price or face ruin when the rates take effect. 22 of Cleveland's 26 refiners sell. Most transactions occur in February and March of 1872. Later, this will be called the Cleveland Massacre. It is the moment when Standard Oil transforms from the largest Cleveland refiner into the dominant force in American oil. One of those confrontations occurs on a February evening in the office of a small Cleveland refinery owned by a man named Isaac Hewitt. Hewitt has operated his refinery for 8 years, building it from a single, still to a modest operation employing 20 men. He produces good kerosene, pays his debts, supports a wife and 4 children. He is not wealthy, but he is stable, comfortable. Rockefeller arrives at 6 in the evening, accompanied by Henry Flagler. They do not make an appointment, they simply appear. Hewitt, working late on his accounts, is startled when his clerk announces the visitors. He knows who Rockefeller is. Everyone in Cleveland's oil trade knows who Rockefeller is. The conversation is brief. Rockefeller explains the South Improvement Company in factual, unemotional terms. The rates will change. Non-members will pay premiums. Members will receive rebates. Hewitt's costs will increase by approximately 40%. Standard's costs will decrease by approximately 20%. The mathematics are simple. Hewitt cannot survive. He should sell now while Rockefeller is offering fair value. Hewitt asks how this is legal. Rockefeller explains that it is entirely legal that railroads have the right to negotiate rates with individual shippers, that there is no law requiring uniform pricing. Hewitt asks how this is moral. Rockefeller's response is the core of his worldview compressed into a single answer. The market is wasteful. Too many refiners produce too much capacity. Consolidation will eliminate waste and lower consumer prices. You can be part of that consolidation voluntarily, or the market will force you out involuntarily. The choice is yours. Hewitt asks for time to consider. Rockefeller gives him 48 hours. He returns 2 days later for Hewitt's answer. Hewitt sells. The price is fair. Rockefeller later points to this as evidence of his reasonableness, but Hewitt has no leverage to negotiate higher. He takes what is offered because the alternative is bankruptcy. 3 months later, Hewitt's refinery is integrated into Standard's operations. Hewitt receives cash and some Standard stock. He uses the money to buy a hardware store. He never speaks publicly about the transaction, but his son will later tell a journalist that his father never forgave himself for selling, that he felt he had surrendered rather than fought. 22 such conversations occur across Cleveland in February and March of 1872. Some refinery owners accept quickly, recognizing they have no choice. Others resist, demand higher prices, threaten to fight. Rockefeller remains patient, unemotional, implacable. He repeats the same mathematics to every holdout. The numbers do not change. Eventually, 22 of 26 sell. The 4 who refuse are out of business within a year. Rockefeller will always maintain that he paid fair prices, that he saved failing businesses, that the refiners he bought were already struggling. There is truth in this. Many were undercapitalized and vulnerable, but there is also truth in the fact that he used the threat of the South Improvement Company, a scheme that never actually operated, as a gun to their heads. The sellers had no good options. They could sell at Rockefeller's price or gamble that public pressure would kill the South Improvement Company before it destroyed them. Most took the certain money over the uncertain fight. And here is what we must understand about John D. Rockefeller at age 32, in the immediate aftermath of the Cleveland massacre. He genuinely believes he is bringing order to chaos. He sees an industry where overproduction leads to waste, where price instability bankrupts both producers and refiners, where consumers receive dangerous products of inconsistent quality. He sees small refiners operating inefficiently, wasting crude, producing inferior kerosene. He believes consolidation is not merely profitable but morally necessary. Competition, in his view, is wasteful. Combination is progress. This is not rationalization. This is genuine conviction rooted in his mother's teaching that wealth must serve righteous purpose. He is a devout Baptist who teaches Sunday school every week, who tithes 10% of his income from his first job as a bookkeeper, who believes God has given him the ability to organize commerce for the benefit of society. The fact that this organization also makes him immensely wealthy is, in his worldview, proof of God's approval. He is doing well by doing good. The two are inseparable. Every Sunday morning, Rockefeller teaches a class of young men at the Erie Street Baptist Church in Cleveland. He arrives early, prepares his lesson carefully, speaks with earnest conviction about biblical principles of stewardship and service. His students respect him, unaware of the business battles he is fighting during the week. To them, he is Mr. Rockefeller, the successful businessman who gives generously to the church and speaks with quiet authority about moral duty. He never discusses business in Sunday school, but his religious beliefs and business methods are inseparably linked in his mind. When he lectures about the parable of the talents, the servant who multiplies his master's money is rewarded, while the servant who buries it is punished, he believes he is describing his own life. God has given him talents for organization and efficiency. To waste those talents through sentiment or false compassion would be sin. To use them ruthlessly in service of greater order is righteousness. His prayers reflect this worldview. He thanks God for his success, interpreting business victories as divine approval. When competitors fail, he sees God's judgment on inefficiency. When he acquires another refinery, he views it as God working through him to improve the industry. This is not hypocrisy. It is the genuine belief system of a man who cannot conceive that God would disapprove of actions that lower consumer prices and eliminate waste. But if Rockefeller believes consolidation is righteous, the independent oilmen believe it is tyranny. To them, Standard Oil is an octopus, its tentacles strangling competition. They organize resistance. The Petroleum Producers Union forms to coordinate independent action. They attempt to build their own pipelines to bypass railroad control. They lobby state legislatures for anti-monopoly laws. They fund newspapers that publish exposés of Standard's practices. For the next 3 decades, independent oilmen will fight Standard Oil through every available means, legal, political, and occasionally violent. And Standard will win almost every fight. Not because its opponents lack courage or conviction, but because Standard has structural advantages that make sustained resistance nearly impossible. It has the lowest costs in the industry, it has preferential railroad rates, it has access to capital through Wall Street connections that small operators cannot match, and it has something else, information. Standard Oil knows what its competitors are shipping, where they are shipping it, and at what price. It knows because railroad clerks, dock workers, and pipeline employees pass that information to Standard representatives. Later investigations will reveal that Standard maintained a network of informants throughout the oil regions, tracking competitors' movements with near-perfect accuracy. This intelligence network operates with sophisticated precision. Standard maintains agents in every major oil-producing and refining center. These agents cultivate relationships with railroad clerks who have access to shipping manifests. A clerk earning $15 per week receives an extra $5 per month for providing copies of competitors' shipping records to Standard. The clerk sees this as harmless. He is not stealing, just sharing information that Standard could theoretically obtain through public sources. He does not understand that the aggregated information gives Standard detailed knowledge of every competitor's operations. Standard knows when a Pittsburgh refiner receives an unusually large crude shipment, suggesting they have secured a major customer. Standard knows when a Philadelphia refiner ships product to Boston, indicating they are trying to enter Standard's territory. Standard knows production volumes, shipping routes, customer locations. This intelligence allows Standard to respond to competitive threats before they fully develop. A refiner trying to expand into new territory finds Standard has already dropped prices in that market, making entry unprofitable. A producer trying to bypass Standard by selling directly to independent refiners finds Standard has already contacted those refiners with better offers. This intelligence allows Standard to target competitors precisely. If an independent refiner in Pittsburgh starts gaining market share, Standard can temporarily drop prices in that specific market until the competitor exhausts its capital. Once the competitor fails, Standard raises prices again. The practice is called predatory pricing. It is effective because Standard's size and capital reserves allow it to sustain losses in one market while maintaining profits in others. Smaller refiners lack that flexibility. They must make money in their local market or die. Standard can lose money in a local market as long as it eventually wins. By 1877, Standard Oil controls approximately 90% of American refining capacity. It has achieved this through acquisition, not construction. Rockefeller rarely builds new refineries. He buys existing ones, often at distressed prices, integrates them into Standard's operations, imposes efficiency standards, and squeezes out costs. The pattern repeats in Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, New York. In each city, independent refiners face the same choice: sell to Standard or compete against an opponent with lower costs, better intelligence, and deeper pockets. But controlling 90% of refining is not the same as controlling the industry. Crude oil producers still determine supply. Railroads still control transportation rates. Consumers still purchase from independent distributors. Standard's dominance in refining is a choke point, but it is not yet a complete vertical monopoly. For that, Rockefeller needs to control every stage from extraction to final sale. And the key to that control is pipelines. In 1879, a new technology threatens to break Standard's railroad leverage. Pipelines can transport crude oil from Pennsylvania fields directly to refineries, bypassing railroads entirely. The first successful long-distance pipeline built by independent producers runs from the oil regions to Reading, Pennsylvania. It proves that pipelines are not merely feasible, but superior to railroads for crude transport. They are faster, cheaper, and immune to railroad rate manipulation. The pipeline construction is itself an epic of engineering and determination. Independent producers, desperate to escape railroad dependency, invest their savings in an untested technology. Engineers design pumping stations to push crude oil over the Allegheny Mountains. Workers dig trenches through rocky soil, lay iron pipe, seal joints with lead. The railroads, recognizing the threat, attempt sabotage. Mysterious accidents destroy pumping equipment. Landowners who have granted right-of-way suddenly revoke permission after railroad representatives visit. Pennsylvania legislators, influenced by railroad lobbying, introduce bills to regulate pipelines out of existence. But the independents persist. The pipeline reaches Reading in 1879 and begins operations. For the first time, crude oil flows from Pennsylvania to refineries without touching a railroad car. The cost advantage is immediate and substantial. Independent refiners who connect to the pipeline see their crude costs drop by 30%. They begin expanding production, confident they can now compete with Standard. Rockefeller watches this development with alarm disguised as calm. Publicly, Standard dismisses pipelines as impractical, unsuited to long-distance transport. Privately, Rockefeller recognizes that pipelines are superior to railroads and that independent control of pipeline infrastructure threatens Standard's entire business model. He cannot allow this. Independent producers see pipelines as liberation from Standard's railroad alliances. If they can build enough pipelines, they can ship crude to independent refineries without paying Standard-subsidized railroad rates. Rockefeller sees the same thing from the opposite angle. If independents control pipelines, they control crude supply. Standard's refining dominance becomes vulnerable. The solution is simple. Standard must own the pipelines. Over the next 5 years, Standard acquires or builds thousands of miles of pipeline. It buys existing independent lines. It constructs new lines from oil fields to its refineries. It extends lines to the Atlantic coast, allowing direct shipment to international markets. By 1884, Standard owns or controls 85% of pipeline capacity in the oil regions. Independent producers who refuse to sell crude to Standard at its offered prices find they cannot ship their oil anywhere. The pipelines are Standard's, and Standard refuses access. The pipeline acquisitions follow the same pattern as the refinery acquisitions. Standard identifies independent pipeline companies. Standard offers to buy them at fair prices. If the owners refuse, Standard builds competing pipelines parallel to the independent lines, then drops shipping rates below cost to steal customers. The independent pipelines, unable to compete with subsidized rates, see their revenue collapse. They sell at distressed prices or go bankrupt. Standard acquires their assets at liquidation sales. One independent pipeline operator, a man named Lewis Emery Jr., refuses to sell despite Standard's pressure. Emery operates a pipeline from the Bradford oil fields to Buffalo. Standard builds a parallel line and offers shipping at 50% of Emery's rates. Emery matches the price, operating at a loss, determined to outlast Standard. The price war continues for 8 months. Emery finances his losses by mortgaging everything he owns. Standard finances its losses from profits in other markets. Emery's wife begs him to sell. His children hear creditors pounding on their door. His employees go weeks without pay, staying loyal only because Emery promises to make them whole when he wins. But he cannot win. Standard has effectively infinite resources for this fight. Emery has a house, a farm, and the loyalty of men who cannot feed their families on promises. In month 9, Emery sells his pipeline to Standard for 40 cents on the dollar. He will spend the rest of his life fighting Standard through politics and journalism, becoming one of the independent oil movement's most effective advocates. But he will never recover financially. This is the moment when Standard Oil completes its transformation from horizontal monopoly to vertical monopoly. It controls refining, transportation, and increasingly production. It owns barrel factories that supply its refineries. It owns plants that produce sulfuric acid for refining processes. It owns warehouses, distribution networks, retail outlets. An independent producer who refuses to sell crude to Standard has no pipeline access. An independent refiner who somehow obtains crude has no transportation network for finished products. An independent distributor who somehow obtains kerosene faces competition from Standard's retail agents who can temporarily undercut any price. The system is brilliantly constructed. Each component reinforces the others. Control of pipelines makes refining dominance sustainable. Control of refining makes transportation infrastructure valuable. Control of transportation makes retail distribution possible, and the profits from this integrated system fund further expansion. Standard reinvests earnings rather than distributing them fully to shareholders. Rockefeller personally lives modestly. He will later be famous for giving dimes to children as tokens of thrift, and demands that the company operate with the same austerity. Every saved penny goes back into the machine. Rockefeller's personal life reflects the same discipline he imposes on his business. He lives in a comfortable but not ostentatious house in Cleveland. He wears plain suits, eats simple meals, avoids luxury. His one indulgence is his estate, Forest Hill, where he rides horses and walks the grounds. But even there he tracks expenses obsessively. He knows what every employee costs, what maintenance runs annually, what could be cut without reducing function. His wife, Laura Celestia Spellman, whom he calls Seti, shares his Baptist faith and frugal habits. They met at high school, married in 1864, and built a partnership based on shared values. Seti manages their household with the same efficiency John applies to business. She tracks every household expense in ledgers he reviews monthly. She teaches their children, Bessie, Alta, Edith, and John Jr., that wealth is responsibility, not indulgence. The Rockefeller children wear hand-me-down clothes, earn money through household chores, are taught to account for every penny they spend. Visitors to the Rockefeller home expecting opulence are surprised by the simplicity. The furniture is quality but plain. The meals are ample but not extravagant. There are no servants beyond what is necessary. Rockefeller believes ostentation is wasteful and spiritually dangerous. He has seen wealthy men ruined by luxury, their children spoiled by indulgence. He is determined his family will avoid those pitfalls. Yet even as he lives modestly, his wealth accumulates at unprecedented rates. By the 1880s, he is likely the richest man in America. though precise figures are impossible to determine because Standard Oil is privately held and Rockefeller reveals nothing about his finances. Newspapers speculate he is worth 50 million, 100 million. The actual figure is higher but unknowable even to Rockefeller himself because most of his wealth is Standard Oil stock, and the company has no public market price. But there is a legal problem. Standard Oil is incorporated in Ohio. Ohio law forbids corporations from owning stock in out-of-state companies. Standard operates refineries in multiple states. It owns pipeline companies, barrel factories, distribution networks, each incorporated separately, many in different states. Legally, these are independent companies. Practically, they are controlled by the same small group of men, primarily Rockefeller and his partners. But the control is informal, based on personal relationships and interlocking directorships. If Ohio authorities decide to enforce corporate law strictly, Standard's structure could be challenged. In 1882, Standard's lawyers devise a solution: the trust. All shareholders in the various Standard companies exchange their stock for trust certificates. The trust certificates represent ownership, but the actual stock is held by 9 trustees, Rockefeller and 8 associates. The trustees legally control all Standard companies. Shareholders receive dividends but have no voting rights. The structure centralizes control while remaining, in theory, compliant with state incorporation laws. No single corporation owns out-of-state assets. Instead, a trust holds the stock of multiple corporations. The trust agreement is drafted by Samuel C. T. Dodd, Standard's chief legal counsel. Dodd is a former opponent of Standard, a Pennsylvania lawyer who represented independent producers in their battles against the company. Rockefeller hired him in 1879, recognizing that former enemies often make the most effective allies because they understand their opponent's weaknesses. Dodd brings to Standard intimate knowledge of every legal challenge independents have attempted and why those challenges failed. The trust agreement is a masterpiece of legal engineering. It creates centralized control while maintaining the fiction of separate corporate entities. It allows Standard to operate nationally while remaining compliant technically with state laws that forbid interstate corporate ownership. It provides legal cover for what is essentially a monopoly operating across state boundaries in an era when no federal corporate law exists. The Standard Oil Trust is not the first trust in American business, but it is the first of significant scale. It becomes the model for industrial consolidation across sectors. Sugar, whiskey, lead, tobacco all follow Standard's example. The trust structure allows concentration of control while evading corporate law restrictions. Within a decade, trust becomes a synonym for monopoly, and the public reaction begins to turn decisively against industrial consolidation. But in 1882, when the trust is formalized, public opinion is divided. Many Americans admire Rockefeller as an organizational genius who brought order to chaotic industry. Business publications praise Standard's efficiency. The company's ability to deliver consistent quality kerosene at declining prices is undeniable. In 1870, kerosene cost 26 cents per gallon. By 1885, it costs 8 cents per gallon. Standard's profit margin remains stable, achieved through ruthless cost reduction rather than price increases. This is not the behavior of a monopoly gouging consumers. It is the behavior of a monopoly that understands its survival depends on public perception of value. Standard's quality control becomes legendary in the industry. Every barrel of kerosene is tested before sale. The testing process involves burning samples in standardized lamps under controlled conditions. Kerosene that produces excessive smoke is rejected. Kerosene that contains volatile fractions that could cause explosions is rejected. Only product that meets strict specifications leaves Standard refineries. This consistency builds consumer trust. Households begin requesting Standard Oil kerosene by name, confident it will burn safely and cleanly. The company also invests in consumer education. Standard publishes pamphlets explaining proper lamp maintenance, how to trim wicks, how to clean chimneys, how to fill lamps safely. These pamphlets are distributed free through grocery stores and general stores that sell kerosene. The ostensible purpose is consumer safety. The practical effect is brand building. Standard positions itself as the responsible, trustworthy supplier in a market where competitors still sell dangerous products. And here is the paradox that will define every argument about Standard Oil for the next century. The monopoly that everyone fears will raise prices actually lowers them. The consolidation that destroys competition also reduces costs. The trust that independent businessmen despise also benefits consumers. How do we judge this? Is a monopoly justified if it charges less than competitive markets? Is consolidation acceptable if it increases efficiency? Does the end of lower prices justify the means of predatory competition? Rockefeller has his answer. He believes Standard Oil is a positive force, that consolidation benefits everyone, that the company's profits are justified by the value it creates. He will maintain this belief until his death, but in 1882 there are already people who see Standard Oil differently, who see it not as beneficial consolidation, but as dangerous concentration of power, who believe that even if Standard charges low prices today, its monopoly position allows it to raise prices tomorrow, who argue that competition is valuable not merely for current prices but for preserving economic freedom. These people are gathering evidence, they are documenting Standard's practices, they are preparing arguments that will eventually reach courts and legislatures. And among them is a young woman whose father was ruined by Standard Oil, who will spend 20 years researching the company's history and who will write the series of articles that shapes public opinion more than any other single work. Her name is Ida Minerva Tarbell. But in 1882, Tarbell is 25 years old, teaching school in Ohio, barely aware of the oil industry that destroyed her father's business. Standard Oil is at its peak, seemingly invincible. Rockefeller is 43, the richest man in America, leading a company that processes 9 out of every 10 barrels of oil refined in the United States. The trust structure is in place. The pipeline network is complete. The retail distribution system is expanding. International markets are opening. Everything is working. And then the politics shift. In 1888, political opposition to trusts reaches critical mass. Both major parties include anti-monopoly language in their platforms. Newspapers run exposés of trust practices. Farm organizations, labor unions, and small business groups demand action. In 1890, Congress passes the Sherman Antitrust Act, declaring illegal every contract, combination in the form of trust or otherwise, or conspiracy in restraint of trade or commerce. The language is broad, almost vague. What constitutes restraint of trade? How much market control is too much? The law provides no clear answers, leaving enforcement to courts and prosecutors. The Sherman Act passes with overwhelming majorities in both House and Senate. President Benjamin Harrison signs it in July 1890. The law is celebrated as a triumph of popular sovereignty over corporate power. Newspapers publish editorials praising Congress for finally confronting the trust menace. Labor groups hold rallies thanking their representatives. The law is popular, its passage politically easy. But the law is also vague to the point of uselessness. What is a restraint of trade? Every business contract restrains trade to some degree. An exclusive supply agreement restrains the supplier from selling to competitors. A non-compete clause restrains employees from working for rivals. Are all such agreements illegal? The law does not say. How much market concentration is too much? Is 50% market share illegal? 75%? 90%? The law provides no threshold. What penalties should courts impose on violators? The law allows for fines and imprisonment, but specifies no amounts or terms. The vagueness is not accidental. Congress wants to appear tough on trusts without specifying how toughness should manifest. Legislators from different states have different concerns. Western farmers fear railroad monopolies. Southern politicians fear northern industrial trusts. Northeastern representatives hear from both pro-business and antitrust constituencies. The vague language allows everyone to vote yes, while meaning different things. The law is a political solution to a political problem. Whether it is an economic solution to an economic problem remains to be seen. Standard Oil's lawyers review the Sherman Act and conclude the company is safe. The law targets trusts that raise prices or restrict output. Standard has lowered prices and increased output. Its monopoly has made kerosene more available, not less. Its efficiency benefits consumers. Surely courts will recognize this. The legal department advises minimal concern, but in 1892, Ohio's Attorney General files suit against Standard Oil, arguing that the trust structure violates Ohio corporate law. The case has nothing to do with the Sherman Act. It is purely a state corporate law matter. The Ohio Supreme Court rules against Standard. The trust must dissolve. All Ohio incorporated companies must withdraw from the trust structure. Standard complies technically. The trust certificates are cancelled. But practical control does not change. The same 9 trustees who controlled the trust now control the companies through interlocking directorships and informal agreements. Ownership is redistributed, but Rockefeller and his associates maintain effective control. It is a shell game, a technical compliance that changes nothing substantive. Ohio authorities know this but lack tools to prevent it. The law can mandate corporate structure but cannot prevent informal coordination among wealthy men who trust each other. In 1899, Standard's lawyers devise a new structure. New Jersey has recently changed its incorporation laws to allow holding companies, corporations, that exist solely to own stock in other corporations. Standard Oil Company of New Jersey is reorganized as a holding company controlling all Standard entities. The trust is gone, replaced by a structure that is legal under New Jersey law and accomplishes the same centralization. Rockefeller remains the largest shareholder. John Archbold becomes president, handling daily operations. Rockefeller increasingly focuses on philanthropy, though he retains ultimate control through his shareholding. This is the structure that exists in 1900 when Theodore Roosevelt becomes president. Roosevelt campaigns as a trust buster, promising to rein in monopolistic corporations. His rhetoric is fierce, but his initial actions are cautious. He knows that most Americans have ambivalent feelings about trusts. They distrust concentrated power, but also appreciate low prices and industrial efficiency. Roosevelt needs to choose targets carefully to prosecute trusts that are clearly harmful while avoiding those that can claim consumer benefits. In 1902, he targets Northern Securities Company, a railroad holding company. The case goes to the Supreme Court, which rules in the government's favor in 1904. The decision establishes that the Sherman Act can be enforced against holding companies, not just trusts. This is ominous for Standard Oil. If the government wins against Northern Securities, it might win against Standard, but the truly devastating blow comes not from government, but from journalism. In November 1902, McClure's magazine begins publishing a serialized history of Standard Oil written by Ida Tarbell. The series runs for 19 installments, concluding in October 1904. It is meticulous, documented, devastating. Tarbell has spent 2 years researching, interviewing former Standard employees, examining court records, compiling evidence of every predatory practice, every railroad rebate, every crushed competitor. She writes with controlled fury, the fury of someone whose family was destroyed by the entity she is documenting. The impact of Tarbell's series is immediate and profound. Within weeks of the first installment, magazine sales skyrocket. McClure's prints additional copies to meet demand. Readers across America encounter, many for the first time, documented evidence of how Standard Oil actually operates. The series is not sensational yellow journalism. It is methodical, almost clinical in its presentation of facts, and that precision makes it devastating. Tarbell structures each installment around a specific aspect of Standard's operations. One installment focuses exclusively on railroad rebates, providing tables of actual rates charged to Standard versus rates charged to competitors. Another dissects the Cleveland massacre, interviewing surviving refiners who sold to Rockefeller under duress. A third examines the espionage network, quoting former informants who describe how they gathered intelligence for Standard. The writing style is deliberately restrained. Tarbell allows the facts to generate outrage without amplifying them through rhetorical excess. When she describes a refiner driven to bankruptcy by predatory pricing, she provides the man's name, the dates of the price war, the financial statements showing his declining revenues. She does not need to editorialize. The numbers speak for themselves. Rockefeller's associates urge him to respond. To refute Tarbell's allegations publicly, he refuses. Not a word, he tells them. Silence is dignity, but his silence is interpreted as guilt. Newspapers that reprint portions of Tarbell's series add editorial commentary condemning Standard. Political cartoonists create increasingly savage depictions of Rockefeller as an octopus, a serpent, a spider at the center of a web. Public opinion, which had been divided about trusts, hardens decisively against Standard Oil specifically and monopolies generally. Ministers cite Tarbell's series in sermons, framing Standard Oil as a moral issue rather than merely an economic one. How can we teach our children honesty, one prominent pastor asks his congregation, when the richest man in America achieved his wealth through deception? Women's groups organize boycotts, more effective this time because Tarbell has taught consumers how to identify Standard's products. Labor unions pass resolutions condemning monopoly power and demanding government action. The series transforms Ida Tarbell into a national figure. She receives speaking invitations from universities, civic organizations, reform groups. She becomes the public face of the muckraking movement, proof that rigorous investigation and clear writing can shift public opinion more effectively than inflammatory rhetoric. Other journalists study her methods, attempting to replicate her success with investigations of other trusts and corrupt political machines. Tarbell's father was an independent oilman in Pennsylvania during the 1870s. He built oil tanks, supplied crude to small refiners, made a modest living. Then Standard Oil consolidated the region, prices dropped, independent refiners failed, tank demand collapsed. Franklin Tarbell's business failed. The family survived but never recovered financially. Ida watched her father's spirit break. She channeled that experience into 2 decades of research and a series of articles that shaped American opinion about monopoly more than any government report or legal decision. Ida Tarbell grows up in Titusville, Pennsylvania during the oil boom years. As a child, she watches her father build his business, watches their family's fortunes rise as oil transforms their region. She remembers the optimism of those early years, the sense that hard work and honest dealing would be rewarded. Then, Standard arrives. She watches her father struggle to maintain his business as Standard squeezes independent refiners out of the market. She watches him come home night after night, increasingly defeated, aging visibly under the stress. One evening stands out in her memory. She is 12 years old. Her father returns from a meeting with a potential customer who has decided to buy exclusively from Standard. Franklin Tarbell sits at the kitchen table, head in his hands, silent. Ida's mother tries to comfort him, but he waves her away. Ida watches from the doorway, too young to fully understand but old enough to recognize that something fundamental has broken. Her father is not merely losing business, he is losing faith that honest effort matters, that fairness exists, that the world rewards merit. The memory burns into Ida's mind. It shapes her education. She becomes one of the first women to attend Allegheny College, studying biology and writing. It shapes her career. She becomes a journalist, specifically an investigative journalist focused on exposing corporate malfeasance. When McClure's magazine offers her the opportunity to investigate Standard Oil, she accepts immediately. This is personal. This is justice delayed but not denied. The power of Tarbell's work is its specificity. She names names, dates, transactions, quotes internal Standard documents. She shows that railroad rebates were not merely favorable rates, but actual payments from competitors' freight bills. She documents predatory pricing campaigns against specific independent refiners. She reveals the espionage network that tracked competitors' shipments. She demonstrates that Standard's efficiency was real, but achieved partially through illegal and coercive means. You can admire the machine while condemning how it was built. Her research is exhaustive. She travels to Pennsylvania, Ohio, New York, interviewing hundreds of people who worked for or competed against Standard. She finds former Standard employees willing to describe internal practices. She obtains shipping records that document railroad rebates. She collects testimony from refiners who were driven out of business by predatory pricing. She examines court records from every lawsuit filed against Standard, piecing together patterns that individual cases obscured. The writing is clear, factual, devastating. Tarbell does not editorialize excessively. She presents evidence and allows readers to draw conclusions, but the evidence is damning. Standard did not merely compete aggressively, it used methods designed to make competition impossible. It did not merely achieve efficiency, it leveraged that efficiency through practices that violated fair dealing even when they did not violate explicit laws. Rockefeller never responds publicly. Privately, he dismisses Tarbell as Miss Tarbarrel, suggests she is motivated by personal vendetta rather than truth. Standard's defenders point out that Tarbell's father was a failed businessman, that her perspective is biased. But the specificity of her documentation is irrefutable. She has not merely alleged misconduct, she has proven it through Standard's own records. Public opinion shifts decisively. The McClure's series is reprinted as a book and becomes a bestseller. Other journalists follow Tarbell's lead, investigating other trusts. The muckraking movement gains momentum. Roosevelt, seeing public opinion turn, authorizes the Justice Department to investigate Standard Oil for Sherman Act violations. In 1906, the federal government files suit. The complaint alleges that Standard Oil of New Jersey and its subsidiaries constitute an illegal combination in restraint of trade. The case will take 3 years to reach trial, another 2 to reach the Supreme Court. During this period, Rockefeller gradually withdraws from active management. He is 67 years old, suffering from a stress-related condition that has caused complete hair loss, alopecia. He spends more time on his estate in New York, focusing on philanthropic projects, but he remains the majority shareholder, the symbolic face of the monopoly the government is prosecuting. The government's legal team assembles a case unprecedented in scope and ambition. Lead prosecutor Frank Kellogg, who will later serve as Secretary of State and win the Nobel Peace Prize, coordinates dozens of attorneys who spend months reviewing Standard's corporate records, conducting depositions, interviewing former employees and competitors. The documentary evidence alone fills hundreds of filing boxes. Witness lists include everyone from railroad executives who negotiated rebate agreements to small-town kerosene dealers who were driven out of business by Standard's pricing tactics. The trial, when it finally begins in 1908, attracts national attention. Newspapers assign reporters to cover it daily. The courtroom in St. Louis, chosen because it is more geographically neutral than New York or Chicago, is packed with spectators, journalists, and representatives from other corporations watching nervously to see if the government can actually prevail against a monopoly of Standard's power and resources. Standard's defense strategy is sophisticated and multi-pronged. Its attorneys argue that the company achieved its market dominance through superior efficiency, not illegal practices. They present evidence of Standard's cost reductions, quality improvements, and price decreases. They call economists who testify that Standard's consolidation benefited consumers. They argue that railroad rebates, while perhaps unfair, were not illegal under laws in effect when they occurred. They contend that the Sherman Act is unconstitutionally vague, that Congress never defined what constitutes an illegal restraint of trade. The prosecution counters with specific instances of predatory behavior. They show that Standard did not merely achieve efficiency, it leveraged that efficiency through practices designed to make competition impossible. They document cases where Standard temporarily dropped prices below cost in specific markets to destroy local competitors, then raised prices after those competitors failed. They present testimony from former Standard employees describing the espionage network. They show that Standard's control of pipelines prevented independent producers from accessing markets even when they could produce crude oil more cheaply than Standard's own wells. One particularly damaging piece of evidence emerges from Standard's own correspondence. An internal memo from a Standard executive to Rockefeller discusses handling a troublesome independent refiner in Pittsburgh. The memo outlines a plan to contact the refiner's crude suppliers and offer them higher prices in exchange for exclusivity, cutting off the refiner's supply. The memo concludes this will cost us perhaps $10,000, but once the refiner is eliminated, we can recover the expense through restored pricing. The language is clinical, businesslike, utterly indifferent to the human cost of the strategy. Rockefeller himself is deposed but never testifies in court. His deposition, conducted over several days in his New York office, reveals a man who views the legal proceedings with detached bemusement. He answers questions precisely, volunteering nothing, frequently claiming not to recall specific details of decades-old transactions. When asked about predatory pricing, he responds that Standard has always sought to be efficient, that lower prices benefit consumers. When confronted with evidence of railroad rebates, he notes that such arrangements were legal when negotiated. When questioned about crushed competitors, he suggests they failed due to their own inefficiency, not Standard's actions. The deposition reveals Rockefeller's genuine inability to see Standard's practices as anything other than beneficial rationalization of a chaotic industry. He is not lying when he claims he did nothing wrong. He genuinely believes that consolidation was necessary, that the methods employed were justified by the outcomes, that Standard Oil made Americans better off even as it destroyed thousands of independent businesses. His worldview allows no space for the possibility that efficiency and coercion can coexist, that good ends and bad means can come from the same organization. The prosecution also calls as witnesses refiners who sold to Standard under duress during the Cleveland massacre. These men, now elderly, described the impossible choice Rockefeller presented: sell at his price or face certain bankruptcy. Some described the emotional toll of surrendering businesses they had built over decades. One witness breaks down while testifying, explaining that he has never forgiven himself for selling, that he feels he betrayed his employees and his principles. The courtroom is silent as he composes himself and finishes his testimony. Throughout the trial, Standard's attorneys maintain that even if some practices were aggressive, they were not illegal under laws in effect at the time. This argument has legal merit but proves politically disastrous. The public does not care about legal technicalities. They care that a monopoly crushed competition through methods that, if not illegal, were certainly unfair. The trial's extensive media coverage ensures that every predatory practice, every crushed competitor, every secret rebate becomes public knowledge. The alopecia manifests gradually during the 1900s. Rockefeller notices hair thinning, then falling out in clumps. Doctors diagnose stress-related alopecia areata. Within 2 years, he is completely bald, head, eyebrows, eyelashes, all gone. He begins wearing wigs in public, carefully styled to mimic his previous appearance. Close associates know about the condition, but the public does not. Photographers are instructed not to capture him without his wig. The condition is psychologically devastating for a man who has prided himself on emotional control. Rockefeller has always believed that worry is weakness, that proper planning eliminates anxiety, but the legal challenges the public vilification. The constant attacks in newspapers, these create stress he cannot eliminate through planning. His body betrays him, manifesting stress he refuses to consciously acknowledge. He withdraws from Standard's management, turning daily operations over to John Archbold and other executives. He spends more time at his estates, playing golf, riding horses, walking. He focuses increasingly on philanthropy, perhaps seeking to reshape his public image, perhaps seeking personal redemption, perhaps simply recognizing that he has more money than he can ever spend and might as well do something useful with it. In 1909, a federal circuit court rules that Standard Oil violated the Sherman Act. The decision orders dissolution. Standard appeals to the Supreme Court. Oral arguments occur in 1910. On May 15, 1911, the court issues its decision. 8 justices support dissolution. 1 dissents. Chief Justice Edward White writes the majority opinion, establishing the rule of reason standard that will govern antitrust law for decades. Not every restraint of trade is illegal, White writes. Only unreasonable restraints violate the Sherman Act. Standard Oil's combination is unreasonable because it was achieved through predatory practices and maintains itself through exclusionary tactics. The decision orders Standard Oil to divest its subsidiaries within 6 months. The company must separate into 34 independent entities, each competing in the open market. Rockefeller, now 72 and fully retired from management, reportedly responds with calm acceptance. He has always maintained that Standard's practices were legal under existing law when they occurred. The Sherman Act changed the rules retroactively. If courts say the company must dissolve, it will dissolve, but here is what happens next. The part that reveals the ultimate irony of the Standard Oil dissolution. The company splits into 34 pieces: Standard Oil of New Jersey, Standard Oil of New York, Standard Oil of California, Standard Oil of Indiana, and 30 others. Shareholders in the parent company receive proportional shares in all successor companies. Rockefeller, who owned approximately 1/4 of Standard Oil of New Jersey, now owns approximately 1/4 of 34 companies. Within 6 months, the combined stock value of the successor companies exceeds the value of the unified company before dissolution. Investors recognize that the pieces, operating independently but in closely related markets, will grow faster than the regulated monopoly could have. Rockefeller's personal wealth increases substantially. The government has broken up the monopoly. The monopolist has become richer. And the successor companies, though technically independent, maintain remarkably similar practices. They do not compete aggressively with each other. They respect each other's territories. Standard Oil of New York focuses on the Northeast. Standard Oil of California dominates the West. Standard Oil of Indiana controls the Midwest. The dissolution created regional monopolies rather than genuine competition. Antitrust law prevented a single national monopoly but could not force actual competition among companies led by executives trained in the same culture, following the same methods, often maintaining personal friendships. Over the following decades, the baby standards consolidate again, not through monopoly, but through mergers reviewed and approved by regulators. Standard Oil of New York becomes Mobil. Standard Oil of New Jersey becomes Exxon. In 1999, they merge into ExxonMobil, reuniting two of the largest fragments. Standard Oil of California becomes Chevron, which later acquires other Standard descendants. By the early 21st century, much of Standard Oil's empire has been reconstructed through legal means, but the automobile changes everything. In 1911, when Standard Oil dissolves, kerosene is still the primary petroleum product used for lighting. Electricity is spreading but has not yet replaced kerosene lamps in most American homes. Gasoline is a minor byproduct, sometimes discarded as waste. Within 2 decades, automobiles will reverse this. Gasoline becomes the dominant product. Kerosene becomes the byproduct. The baby standards ride the automobile boom to profits that dwarf the old Standard Oil. The automobile revolution catches the old Standard Oil at a vulnerable moment. The company built its business model around kerosene for lighting. Its refineries are optimized to maximize kerosene output from crude oil. Its distribution networks are designed to deliver kerosene to households and businesses for lighting. Its marketing emphasizes reliability and safety for home illumination. Everything about Standard Oil is oriented toward a market that electricity is slowly rendering obsolete. Henry Ford's introduction of the Model T in 1908 begins transforming gasoline from waste product to valuable commodity. The Model T is not the first automobile, but it is the first affordable one. Ford's assembly line production methods dropped the price from $850 in 1908 to $360 by 1916. Automobile ownership explodes. In 1900, 8,000 automobiles exist in America. By 1920, 9 million. Each automobile requires gasoline. The baby standards, operating independently after the dissolution, can adapt to this market shift more flexibly than a unified Standard Oil might have. Each company focuses on its regional market, building gasoline distribution networks tailored to local conditions. Standard Oil of California develops a network of filling stations along the West Coast. Standard Oil of New York focuses on the densely populated Northeast. Standard Oil of Indiana dominates the Midwest. They are not exactly competing, they respect territorial boundaries established during the unified Standard Oil era, but they are innovating independently, experimenting with different business models. The filling station itself is an invention of this era. Before the 1910s, automobile owners bought gasoline in cans from hardware stores or livery stables. The experience was inconvenient and often dangerous. Gasoline sold in unmarked containers, stored improperly, occasionally exploding. The baby standards recognized that convenient, safe gasoline distribution could create customer loyalty and justify premium prices. Standard Oil of California opens the first purpose-built filling station in Seattle in 1907. The station features an underground storage tank, a visible pump, and an attendant who fills customers' tanks and provides basic service, checking tire pressure, cleaning windshields, inspecting oil levels. The model succeeds. Standard of California builds more stations. Other baby standards copy the model. By the early 1920s, filling stations are common features of American roadsides, and the baby standards dominate the market. Branding becomes crucial in this new market. During the unified Standard Oil era, kerosene sold largely as a commodity. Consumers asked for kerosene, not Standard Oil kerosene, but gasoline for automobiles allows differentiation. The baby standards develop distinct brand identities. Standard Oil of New Jersey markets under the Esso brand, a phonetic spelling of SO, the initials of Standard Oil. Standard Oil of New York uses Saucony, later becoming Mobil. Standard Oil of California becomes Chevron. Standard Oil of Indiana becomes Amoco. These brands compete on perceived quality, service, and convenience rather than price. A gallon of gasoline from Esso is chemically identical to a gallon from any other refiner, but Esso markets its product as superior through advertising emphasizing quality controls, additives, and research. Consumers pay a few pennies more per gallon for the perceived assurance of a trusted brand. The profit margins on branded gasoline exceed the margins on commodity kerosene by significant amounts. The baby standards also benefit from the discovery of new oil fields that break Pennsylvania's dominance. Oil strikes in Texas, Oklahoma, and California create new producing regions closer to growing consumer markets. Standard Oil of California particularly benefits, developing fields in California and along the Pacific coast. These western fields produce crude oil with different characteristics than Pennsylvania crude, higher gasoline yields, lower kerosene yields. This matches the shifting market perfectly. The Spindletop discovery in Texas in 1901 introduces another transformation. The Spindletop well initially produces 100,000 barrels per day, more than all other American wells combined. The discovery proves that oil exists in vast quantities outside Pennsylvania, that new companies can emerge to compete with the baby standards. Gulf Oil and Texaco are founded to develop Spindletop and subsequent Texas discoveries. These companies will become major competitors to the baby standards, preventing any single company from re-establishing the monopoly control that Standard Oil once exercised. Yet even with new competitors, the baby standards maintain dominant positions. They have distribution networks, brand recognition, technical expertise, access to capital. New companies like Gulf and Texaco can compete, but they cannot displace the baby standards from market leadership. The industry structure that emerges is oligopolistic, a few large firms dominating the market, competing but also implicitly coordinating to avoid destructive price wars. This oligopoly structure persists through the 20th century. Periodic price wars occur, usually triggered by supply gluts or market share battles, but they are temporary. The major oil companies learn to coexist, to compete on marketing and service while avoiding sustained price competition that would erode everyone's profits. It is not the monopoly that Standard Oil represented, but it is not genuine competition either. It is managed rivalry, an informal accommodation among firms that recognize their mutual interest in stable, profitable markets. Here is the irony that Rockefeller may have recognized when the dissolution order was read. Standard Oil built its empire on a product, kerosene for lighting, that was already becoming obsolete. Electricity was replacing kerosene lamps. If Standard had remained unified, it would have faced declining demand for its core product. The dissolution forced the company to fragment just as a new market, gasoline for automobiles, was emerging. The baby standards could adapt to this new market more flexibly than a single giant monopoly might have. The forced dissolution may have been the best thing that could have happened to Standard's shareholders. Rockefeller will live 26 more years after the Supreme Court decision. He devotes most of his remaining time to philanthropy. The Rockefeller Foundation, established in 1913, becomes one of the largest charitable organizations in the world. He funds the University of Chicago, turning it from a small Baptist college into a major research university. He establishes Rockefeller University, focused on medical research. He supports public health campaigns that eradicate hookworm in the American South. By the time of his death in 1937, he has given away approximately $540 million, more than half his peak fortune. The transition from business titan to philanthropist is gradual but deliberate. As Rockefeller withdraws from Standard's management in the early 1900s, he begins developing what he calls scientific philanthropy, the application of business efficiency principles to charitable giving. He hires Frederick T. Gates, a Baptist minister with organizational abilities, to systematize his charitable work. Gates becomes Rockefeller's philanthropic lieutenant, applying the same rigorous analysis to charitable investments that Rockefeller applied to business investments. Together they develop a philosophy: charity should not merely alleviate suffering, but address root causes. Instead of funding soup kitchens, fund medical research that prevents disease. Instead of giving to individual schools, fund an entire university that will educate thousands. Instead of treating sick individuals, fund public health campaigns that eradicate the diseases afflicting entire populations. It is philanthropy, as Rockefeller practiced business, systematic, scalable, focused on maximum impact per dollar invested. The hookworm eradication campaign exemplifies this approach. Hookworm, a parasitic infection, affects millions of people in the rural South, causing chronic fatigue and cognitive impairment. The infection perpetuates poverty by reducing workers' productivity and children's educational attainment. Gates commissions studies that quantify hookworm's economic impact. The studies estimate that eradicating hookworm would increase Southern agricultural productivity by 25% and significantly improve educational outcomes. Rockefeller funds the Rockefeller Sanitary Commission, which conducts mass screening and treatment programs across 11 southern states. Public health workers travel to rural communities, testing residents, treating infected individuals with newly developed medications, educating people about sanitation practices that prevent reinfection. The campaign is remarkably successful. Within a decade, hookworm rates drop dramatically. Follow-up studies show measurable improvements in school performance and worker productivity in treated areas. The University of Chicago project is even more ambitious. The university, founded by the American Baptist Education Society in 1890, struggles financially from its inception. Rockefeller begins donating in 1891. Over the next 20 years, he gives more than $35 million, equivalent to roughly $1 billion today. The money funds buildings, endows professorships, establishes research laboratories, creates one of the world's first university presses. But Rockefeller does not simply write checks. He insists on structural reforms. The university must hire based on merit, not denominational affiliation. Research must be rigorous, subjected to peer review, published in academic journals accessible to the broader scholarly community. The university must focus on graduate education and research, not merely undergraduate teaching. These requirements transform the University of Chicago from a small Baptist college into a research university that will produce dozens of Nobel laureates and reshape American higher education. Rockefeller University, established as the Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research in 1901, focuses exclusively on biomedical research. Rockefeller funds it with an initial $10 million, eventually giving more than $60 million over his lifetime. The institute attracts the world's leading scientists by offering them resources, freedom from teaching obligations, and support for long-term research projects. Scientists at Rockefeller Institute will make fundamental discoveries about viruses, genetics, and cellular biology. The institute will produce 24 Nobel Prize winners and train hundreds of researchers who spread its rigorous approach to other institutions. The philanthropy is genuine. Rockefeller genuinely believes in these causes and invests enormous time and resources in making them succeed, but it is also strategic. The giving begins at the height of public hostility toward Rockefeller following Tarbell's series and intensifies during the federal antitrust prosecution. Whether consciously or unconsciously, the philanthropy rehabilitates his reputation. Newspaper editorials that once condemned him as a robber baron begin acknowledging his charitable works. Universities that might have refused his money in the 1890s eagerly accept it in the 1900s. Rockefeller also gives extensively to Baptist institutions, churches, seminaries, missionary organizations. These donations reflect his genuine religious faith, but also strengthen ties to communities that provide moral validation. Baptist publications defend Rockefeller against his critics, arguing that his business success demonstrates God's favor and his charitable giving demonstrates Christian stewardship. This religious support provides him with a constituency that views attacks on Rockefeller as attacks on Christian philanthropy itself. His personal life during these later years is quiet, almost reclusive. He divides time between his estates in New York and Florida, playing golf, riding horses, corresponding with philanthropic advisors. He maintains a strict routine, rising early, eating simple meals, walking the grounds, reviewing financial statements and charitable reports, retiring early. He sees few people outside family and close advisors. He gives no interviews, makes no public speeches, maintains absolute silence about Standard Oil and the antitrust case. His relationship with his son, John D. Rockefeller Jr., deepens during this period. Jr., as the family calls him, is temperamentally different from his father, more anxious, more socially conscious, more troubled by the moral questions surrounding the family wealth. Father and son spend hours walking the grounds of the family estate, discussing philanthropy, business ethics, social responsibility. These conversations shape Junior's life. He will eventually devote himself entirely to philanthropy, managing the Rockefeller Foundation and funding major projects including the restoration of Colonial Williamsburg and the construction of Rockefeller Center in New York. The father-son relationship is complex, marked by deep affection and fundamental differences in worldview. Senior genuinely believes Standard Oil benefited society, that its efficiency and low prices justified its methods. Junior is less certain, more willing to acknowledge that Standard's practices harmed real people, more interested in using the family fortune to address social problems that his father's generation helped create. Senior views this as sentiment clouding judgment. Junior views it as moral awareness his father lacks. They never fully resolve these differences, but their mutual respect and affection prevent the disagreements from fracturing their relationship. The philanthropic work is systematic, approached with the same rigor he applied to business. Rockefeller does not simply donate money to whoever asks. He investigates causes, evaluates organizations, demands measurable results. When he decides to fund hookworm eradication in the South, he first commissions studies to determine the disease's prevalence and economic impact. He funds pilot programs to test treatment methods. He measures results, adjusts approaches, scales what works. The Rockefeller Foundation's public health work will save millions of lives globally. Its support for scientific research will contribute to major medical advances. Its funding of universities will educate generations of leaders. These are real achievements, substantial and lasting. They are also consciously or unconsciously reputation rehabilitation. The robber baron becomes the generous philanthropist. The destroyer of competitors becomes the savior of the poor. The charitable giving is genuine. Rockefeller believes wealth is a trust from God to be used for public benefit. But it is also strategic. The philanthropy rehabilitates his reputation. The robber baron becomes the generous donor. Generations born after 1911 know Rockefeller primarily as a philanthropist, not as the architect of monopoly. The giving reshapes his legacy more effectively than any public relations campaign could. He dies at age 97 at his winter home in Ormond Beach, Florida, on May 23, 1937. The death is not unexpected. He has been declining for months, his body finally surrendering after nearly a century. He dies peacefully in his sleep, surrounded by family. His last words, spoken to his son the previous evening, are characteristically practical. Remember, everything worthwhile requires persistence. The New York Times obituary runs for multiple pages, detailing both his business career and his philanthropy. It notes that he was the most hated man in America during the Standard Oil battles, but became respected for his charitable works. The obituary struggles with the same question that historians still struggle with. How do we judge a life that created immense value through partially illegal means, that lowered consumer prices through predatory practices, that funded life-saving medical research with monopoly profits? The funeral, held at the family estate in Pocantico Hills, New York, is private and simple, as Rockefeller insisted in instructions left years earlier. No public ceremony, no speeches. A brief service conducted by a Baptist minister, attended by family and close associates. Rockefeller's will, made public days later, reveals the full scope of his philanthropy. Beyond the hundreds of millions given during his lifetime, he leaves substantial additional bequests to the Rockefeller Foundation, the University of Chicago, Rockefeller University, and various Baptist institutions. Newspapers around the world publish editorials assessing his life and legacy. The assessments vary wildly. Business publications praise him as one of history's greatest organizational geniuses, a man who brought order to industrial chaos and demonstrated the possibilities of large-scale corporate organization. Progressive publications condemn him as a robber baron whose wealth was built on crushed competition and exploited workers. Religious publications struggle with the contradiction between his devout faith and his ruthless business methods. Almost everyone acknowledges the complexity, that Rockefeller was neither pure villain nor pure hero, but something more complicated and therefore more interesting. Ida Tarbell, now 80 years old and long retired from journalism, is asked to comment. She offers a statement that captures the ambiguity. John D. Rockefeller was a man of extraordinary abilities who used those abilities to build a monopoly that harmed American economic freedom. But he was also a man who, in his later years, gave away his fortune in ways that saved lives and advanced human knowledge. History will judge him as both because he was both. The statement is measured, fair, and ultimately unsatisfying because it provides no simple verdict. But simple verdicts are impossible for lives as complex as Rockefeller's. In the decades following his death, the Rockefeller family continues his philanthropic work on even larger scale. The Rockefeller Foundation funds the development of high-yield crop varieties that prevent famines across Asia and Latin America, the Green Revolution that saves hundreds of millions of lives. Rockefeller money supports civil rights organizations, environmental conservation, arts and culture. The family name, once synonymous with monopoly and greed, becomes associated with philanthropy and social progress. Yet the business legacy also persists. The baby standards continue consolidating. Exxon and Mobil, separated in 1911, merge again in 1999 to form ExxonMobil, subject to regulatory approval but no longer prohibited by antitrust law. Chevron acquires other Standard descendants. BP traces part of its lineage to Standard Oil. The companies that emerge from the dissolution become the foundation of the global oil industry, their reach extending far beyond anything Rockefeller imagined when he built his first Cleveland refinery. Standard Oil's legacy in American law is clearer than its moral legacy. The 1911 dissolution established precedents that still govern antitrust enforcement. The Supreme Court's rule of reason standard that only unreasonable restraints of trade violate antitrust law allows courts to distinguish between efficiency-driven consolidation and anti-competitive behavior. Modern antitrust cases involving Microsoft, Google, Amazon, and Facebook all cite Standard Oil as foundational precedent. When regulators debate breaking up tech monopolies, they reference the 1911 case. But the economic legacy is more ambiguous. Standard Oil demonstrated that monopolies do not necessarily raise prices. The company charged less than competitive markets and maintained those low prices for decades. It achieved genuine efficiencies through consolidation, standardization, and vertical integration. It made kerosene safer, more consistent, and more available. These are real benefits, measurable and significant. Yet Standard achieved these benefits through practices that were, by any reasonable standard, predatory and coercive. The railroad rebates gave it artificial cost advantages. The espionage network violated competitors' privacy. The predatory pricing campaigns destroyed businesses that might have innovated differently. The pipeline monopoly strangled independent producers. Even if the end result was lower consumer prices, the means included coercion, deception, and market manipulation. And there is a deeper question about economic freedom. Even if a benevolent monopoly charges low prices today, its monopoly position allows it to raise prices tomorrow. Competition provides not merely current benefits, but insurance against future exploitation. When Standard controlled 91% of refining, what would have prevented it from raising prices if it chose? Only the threat of new competition, which its pipeline monopoly and cost advantages made nearly impossible. The company chose to maintain low prices, but that choice was strategic, not compelled. A monopoly that voluntarily restrains itself is still a monopoly. The Standard Oil story reveals a tension that remains unresolved in American capitalism. We value both efficiency and freedom, both low prices and competitive markets, both consumer welfare and economic opportunity. When these values conflict, which should prevail? Standard Oil was efficient, lowered prices, and destroyed competition. Was that good or bad? The answer depends on which value you prioritize. For those who prioritize consumer welfare above all, Standard was beneficial. Lower prices, higher quality, reliable supply, these matter more than the competitive process. If monopoly delivers better results than competition, monopoly is justified. This view, associated with the Chicago School of Economics, became influential in late 20th century antitrust enforcement. Courts began focusing less on market structure and more on consumer prices. Mergers were approved if they promised efficiencies, even if they increased concentration. For those who prioritize economic freedom and competitive opportunity, Standard was harmful regardless of prices. The ability of independent business people to enter markets, compete fairly, and succeed or fail on merit is valuable in itself, apart from consumer prices. A market dominated by a single firm, even an efficient one, is less free than a market with many competitors. This view, associated with the progressive era and mid-20th century antitrust enforcement, emphasizes market structure over immediate consumer welfare. The debate continues today. When Amazon undercuts competitors, achieves enormous scale and delivers low prices to consumers, is it following Standard Oil's model? When Facebook acquires potential competitors like Instagram and WhatsApp, is it preventing the competition that might have challenged its monopoly? When Google preferentially ranks its own services in search results, is it using one monopoly to leverage another? These questions echo the Standard Oil debates from a century ago. The parallels are striking and troubling. Amazon's dominance in online retail mirrors Standard Oil's dominance in refining, achieved through genuine efficiencies, but also through practices that make competition difficult. Amazon's control of marketplace infrastructure, its access to seller data, its ability to offer products at losses subsidized by profits from other divisions. These echo Standard's pipeline monopolies, espionage networks, and predatory pricing. Like Standard Oil, Amazon delivers measurable consumer benefits through low prices and convenience. Like Standard Oil, it crushes potential competitors before they can challenge its dominance. Facebook's acquisition strategy resembles Standard Oil's acquisition of refineries. Buy potential competitors early before they become existential threats. Instagram could have become a social media competitor to Facebook. WhatsApp could have built a communications platform independent of Facebook's ecosystem. By acquiring them, Facebook ensures they reinforce its dominance rather than challenge it. Regulators approved these acquisitions, just as courts initially found nothing illegal in Standard's acquisition of competing refineries. Only later, when the pattern became clear and the dominance became overwhelming, did authorities recognize the cumulative effect? Google's leveraging of its search monopoly to advantage its other services, Maps, Shopping, YouTube, mirrors Standard's use of pipeline control to advantage its refining operations. Control of the infrastructure allows preferential treatment of affiliated services. Independent competitors cannot access the infrastructure on equal terms. Consumers receive good services but lose the innovation that might have emerged from genuine competition. The Google case is literally being litigated using precedents from the Standard Oil dissolution. These modern parallels reveal something important. The fundamental tensions that Standard Oil exposed remain unresolved. Technology has changed, the industries are different, but the economic logic of network effects, economies of scale, and platform control creates similar concentrations of market power. And the same difficult questions persist. Do consumer benefits justify monopolistic practices? Does current efficiency excuse future risk? Should government intervene when markets naturally tend toward concentration? The answers in 1911 were uncertain. They remain uncertain today. We know more about economics, competition, and market structure than the justices who decided Standard Oil, but we are no more confident about where to draw the lines, when to intervene, how much concentration is too much. The Standard Oil case established that government can act against monopolies. It did not, because it could not, provide a formula for when such action is necessary or how it should be structured. Consider the irony of today's debates about breaking up tech companies. Politicians and regulators propose breaking up Facebook by separating Instagram and WhatsApp. They propose breaking up Google by separating its search, advertising, and other businesses. They propose breaking up Amazon by separating its marketplace from its retail operations. These proposals directly echo the Standard Oil dissolution, but they face the same challenge. Will separation actually restore competition? Or will the separated pieces simply coexist peacefully, respecting each other's territories, avoiding genuine rivalry? The Standard Oil experience suggests grounds for skepticism. The baby standards did not compete aggressively with each other. They respected territorial boundaries. They avoided price wars that would have benefited consumers but harmed all competitors. Within decades, they began remerging. If breaking up merely creates multiple large companies that cooperate rather than compete, has anything been accomplished? Or has regulatory action simply reshuffled corporate structure without addressing underlying market power? There is another parallel worth considering. Standard Oil was already becoming obsolete when it was dissolved. Its business model was built around kerosene for lighting, just as electricity was rendering that market obsolete. The dissolution may have actually helped Standard shareholders by forcing the company to fragment and adapt to the emerging gasoline market. Could the same be true of today's tech monopolies? Amazon dominates online retail, but is online retail the future or merely the present? Facebook dominates social media, but will social media remain central to digital communication, or is it already being displaced by newer platforms and technologies? Google dominates search, but will search remain the primary gateway to information as artificial intelligence changes how we access knowledge? Breaking up these companies might actually benefit their shareholders if it forces them to adapt and innovate rather than defend existing business models. The government might believe it is punishing monopolists while actually doing them a favor. This irony was lost on no one who watched Standard Oil shareholders become wealthier after dissolution. It should not be lost on regulators today, and the policy responses echo the 1911 dissolution: break up the monopolies, force divestiture, restore competition. But what if the breaking up makes shareholders richer, as it did with Standard Oil? What if the separated pieces simply respect each other's territories and avoid real competition? What if the efficiencies of integration are lost without gaining genuine competitive benefits? There are no simple answers because the underlying tension is real. Efficiency and freedom sometimes conflict. Low prices and competitive opportunity sometimes conflict. Consumer welfare and economic liberty sometimes conflict. Standard Oil demonstrates all these conflicts in extreme form. What cannot be denied is that Standard Oil shaped American capitalism. It demonstrated the possibility of continent-spanning corporate organization. It showed that industrial processes could be standardized, rationalized, and controlled at unprecedented scale. It proved that vertical integration could reduce costs dramatically. It created the template for corporate consolidation that every major industry followed. Steel, railroads, sugar, tobacco, all pursued the Standard Oil model. It also demonstrated the dangers of unchecked monopoly, the predatory practices, the market manipulation, the crushing of competitors who might have innovated differently. Without Standard Oil's example, the Sherman Antitrust Act might have remained a dead letter, a symbolic gesture without enforcement. Standard's visible dominance, combined with Tarbell's documentation of its practices, created political will for antitrust enforcement that shaped American law for a century. And it demonstrated something else, the limits of government power to control economic concentration. The 1911 dissolution was meant to restore competition. It created 34 companies that maintained most of Standard's market power through implicit coordination and territorial respect. Later, mergers reconstructed much of the empire. Today, ExxonMobil is larger in absolute terms than Standard Oil ever was. Chevron, BP, and ConocoPhillips are all descended from Standard Oil fragments. The dissolution prevented a single monopoly but could not prevent the economic forces that favor consolidation. Perhaps the most important legacy is what Standard Oil revealed about the nature of monopoly power. Monopolies do not necessarily exploit consumers through high prices. They can exploit through other means, by restricting innovation, by limiting consumer choice, by denying opportunity to potential competitors, by accumulating political power that prevents effective regulation. Standard Oil charged low prices but also controlled pipelines that independent producers needed, maintained espionage networks that violated business privacy, and wielded economic power that intimidated competitors. These are harms that cannot be measured in price per gallon. Rockefeller believed until his death that he had done nothing wrong, that Standard Oil was a beneficial force, that the dissolution was unjust. He was not entirely wrong. The company did lower prices, it did improve product quality, it did achieve genuine efficiencies, but he could not see or would not acknowledge that these benefits were achieved through coercion and market manipulation. He could not see that the order he imposed was the order of monopoly, not the order of fair competition. His worldview, shaped by childhood instability and Baptist certainty, could not accommodate the possibility that he was both benefactor and predator, both efficiency expert and trust magnate, both philanthropist and monopolist. The contradiction was real and remains unresolved. The monopoly that lowered prices, the trust that was broken up, making its shareholders richer, the consolidation that increased efficiency while destroying competition, the businessman who funded universities with monopoly profits, the empire that the government destroyed but which reconstructed itself through legal means. Standard Oil was all of these things, and our inability to categorize it simply reflects the genuine complexity of the issues it raised. On May 15, 1911, 8 Supreme Court justices believed they were ending an era of monopolistic abuse. They were partially right. They ended Standard Oil as a unified entity. But they could not end the economic logic that created Standard Oil, the advantages of scale, the efficiencies of integration, the power of capital to consolidate markets. Those forces continued, adapted to legal constraints, and ultimately reconstructed much of what the court tried to dismantle. Perhaps the dissolution's real achievement was not ending monopoly, but establishing that monopoly power has limits, that government can intervene when concentration becomes extreme, that economic freedom matters even when monopoly delivers low prices. These are not small achievements. They established principles that constrain corporate power even when they do not eliminate it. But they also revealed the difficulty of using law to reshape economic reality. Markets tend toward concentration in industries with high capital requirements and economies of scale. Oil refining and distribution have both characteristics. Breaking up Standard Oil could not change these structural features. The successor companies faced the same economic incentives that created Standard Oil. Some consolidated with each other, others grew through internal expansion. The industry remained concentrated, just under different names and legal structures. This is the final irony. The government destroyed Standard Oil to restore competition. Competition returned only briefly and incompletely. Economic forces reasserted themselves. Today's oil industry is less concentrated than Standard's 91% monopoly, but more concentrated than the fragmented chaos of the 1860s. We have neither the monopoly nor the pure competition. We have oligopoly, managed competition, an industry of giants who watch each other carefully and rarely compete on price alone. Is this better than Standard Oil? The question cannot be answered purely through economics. It involves values, priorities, trade-offs, lower prices or economic freedom, efficiency or opportunity, consumer welfare or competitive markets. Different people weigh these differently, which is why the Standard Oil debates continue in every discussion of tech monopolies, media consolidation, and corporate power. What we can say is that Standard Oil mattered. It showed the possibilities and dangers of industrial consolidation. It provoked the legal framework that still governs American business competition. It demonstrated that monopoly power is complex, capable of delivering both benefits and harms, neither purely good nor purely evil. And it showed that destroying monopoly is easier than creating the conditions for genuine competition. The empire that the government destroyed was rebuilt, not identically, not immediately, but rebuilt nonetheless. The forces that created it, economies of scale, capital intensity, network effects, could not be dissolved by judicial decree. They could be constrained, channeled, regulated, but they could not be eliminated. They are inherent in modern industrial capitalism. Rockefeller understood this. When the dissolution order was read, he did not fight. He accepted it with calm that his associates found remarkable. Perhaps he recognized that the legal form of monopoly was ending, but its economic logic would persist. Perhaps he understood that his shareholders would profit from the change. Perhaps, at age 72, he simply no longer cared about business battles and preferred to focus on giving away his fortune. Or perhaps he recognized something deeper, that he had built a machine too powerful for any government to truly destroy, too embedded in economic structure to fully dismantle. The government could break the legal entity called Standard Oil. It could not break the precedents, the methods, the efficiencies, the corporate culture that Standard had created. Those would persist in the successor companies, in the business practices they followed, in the executives they trained, in the strategies they deployed. The empire the government destroyed on May 15th, 1911 was a legal structure, a holding company, a collection of stock certificates. The real empire, the knowledge of how to organize continental-scale industry, the understanding of vertical integration, the methods of achieving maximum efficiency, that empire could not be destroyed. It could only be inherited, adapted, and redeployed by those who learned its lessons. Standard Oil taught American capitalism how to think big, how to consolidate, how to achieve efficiencies through scale. Those lessons shaped every major corporation that followed. The legal structure dissolved, the example endured. That is Standard Oil's true legacy. Not the company that was destroyed, but the model that survived. And perhaps that is the final lesson. That institutions are less powerful than ideas, that corporate structures are less enduring than business methods, that what survives is not the organization, but the organizational knowledge embedded within it. The Supreme Court could dissolve Standard Oil Company of New Jersey. It could not dissolve the understanding of vertical integration, economies of scale, and strategic consolidation that Rockefeller and his associates developed and that their successors carried into new companies and new industries. Every modern corporation that pursues vertical integration, that leverages data about competitors, that uses platform control to advantage affiliated businesses, that acquires potential competitors before they become threats. Every such corporation is, in some sense, following the Standard Oil playbook. The specific practices have been refined, adapted to new technologies and legal constraints. But the fundamental logic remains: control the choke points, achieve the lowest costs, use temporary losses in one market to establish dominance, convert dominance into profits once competition is eliminated. We are still living in the world Standard Oil created, a world where corporate scale matters enormously, where market concentration is the norm in major industries, where antitrust law restrains the most extreme monopolistic practices but cannot prevent the natural tendency of markets to consolidate. We have not resolved the tensions that Standard Oil exposed. We merely manage them, imperfectly, through regulations that evolve too slowly to keep pace with economic change. The story of Standard Oil is not merely history. It is the present, and likely the future, of American capitalism.